Just a heads up, this episode will contain references to domestic abuse and violence, which some people may find distressing. Hi, welcome back to teaatfour. I'm Lauren, and this is the podcast where we talk all things that normally stay in the group chat. I'm joined here today by two incredible women. We have Flo, who is a survivor and content creator, and Sharon, who is a survivor and head of partnerships and development at the National Centre for Domestic Violence. Hi, ladies.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
You're welcome.
So let's start off with Flo. Would you mind sharing a bit about your story and experience with domestic abuse?
Yeah, so I'm Flo, I'm 31. I met my abuser when I was 19. My domestic abuse story is slightly different to a lot of other people because a lot of other people unfortunately experienced emotional abuse long before physical abuse started. But I fell pregnant as soon as I slept with this man. My abuse ranged from physical, emotional, financial and sexual abuse. And his MO, I feel like all abusers have an MO. His MO was waterboarding, which is a torture technique used, it's a banned torture technique actually. But yeah, that was his MO, and that was kind of what I was subjected to for the whole 9 months of my pregnancy. It wasn't until he was caught hurting me whilst I was in labour, and a midwife saw him. That's really where the ball started rolling, when I actually realised what I was going through wasn't okay, it wasn't normal. And yeah, I fled when my baby was 6 weeks old. So I packed up everything in the car, moved back to my hometown in Essex, and tried to start a new life, really.
How has life been since escaping all of that?
It has its challenges, and I think that that's something that isn't really spoken about enough, because we so desperately want survivors to be free that we don't really give them the equipment or the knowledge of what life will be like after. I fled, like I said, a decade ago, but only 4 years ago I had a mental breakdown. I developed agoraphobia, complex PTSD. I kind of thought I was fine. When I first fled, I went to university. I became a trained teacher. I was so adamant that I didn't want to be a statistic to society. I didn't want to be a single mum on benefits. So I dedicated my life to helping other people and being a teacher. Yeah. And I really felt as though everything was fine until it wasn't. I didn't have the tools to say, actually, I've had this horrific thing happen. I need to get mental health support. Yeah. I need to get counselling. I need to really unpack it. I didn't know that, so I didn't do any of that. And yeah, 6 years after I fled, I had an extreme mental breakdown. I actually thought I was hallucinating. It got that bad.
Oh my gosh.
The flashbacks were so bad that I thought I was hallucinating. I thought I was seeing things and hearing things, because I was. Yeah. I just couldn't really process exactly what it was that I was hearing and seeing. So yeah, that was then why I turned to TikTok. Yeah.
I mean, that's how I found out about you and your story. And I think it was specifically the waterboarding, which I had never heard about before your videos. So amazing that you've brought awareness to that. But what was so instrumental in you showing the good, the bad and the ugly of your journey since escaping?
Yeah, I think it's actually a lot of women relate as well, and men, to be honest with you. A lot of women and men. I have helped women and men flee. Yeah. That is a misconception. Everyone thinks that I'm like this man hater, and it's like, I just support domestic abuse victims.
Everyone thinks we are.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't care what the gender is. I just want people to be safe and happy. But yeah, it's normalizing that, and it's about not having the restraints of what mainstream media might put on us and saying you can't say this or you can say this. Yeah. And so it was people really recognizing, and waterboarding is quite common. People are very shocked by my story, but there are hundreds of women and men that I have spoken to that were waterboarded by their ex-partner. This is a banned torture technique within the army, yet here in the United Kingdom it is happening to men and women probably currently, because it is a technique that doesn't leave marks. It's a technique that can cause an extreme amount of damage. And, you know, that's why it's banned, because of the lasting impacts that it has on people. And I think a lot of people were grateful that I brought this to the forefront and to actually normalise that mental health is an issue for years after. Yeah. I also think as well that, you know, a lot of people were like, oh, but you left a decade ago, you should be fine. And it's really difficult. I just paid off £60,000 worth of debt that I was in because of my abuser this year. You know, there's a lot of things that had this lasting impact because I was in debt. I never could afford a new bed. I could never afford a new sofa. I couldn't afford all of these things. I was still paying these debts off. I have since learned, and this is the great thing with TikTok, because I get taught things. I get taught in the comments that there's these things that are available for survivors.
It's amazing.
That I might not know. And then other people that are in that at that moment, they're reading that and they're understanding those resources are readily available. I didn't know that there's charities out there that will help you pay off the debt. I had no idea. So I just took the 60 grand and I paid for it for 10 years. But it's so great that I can then use my platform to say there is support out there for you, that if you have found yourself in financial abuse,
100%,
it's there available for you.
Yeah, amazing that you bring up about the conversation in the comments and like how powerful your platform is. I guess, how was NCDV instrumental in getting out of the situation you were in?
NCDV have been fantastic. So very recently I've actually had to use their services again, because I put my story out online for the world to see. There must have been something going on in my abuser's life, I hypothesize, because he now randomly started re-attacking me again.
Right.
And that was like malice communications. It was like misinformation online. He was spreading so many lies. And there were very scary moments, to be honest with you, very unhinged videos that were pretty worrying. And if anyone saw it, it's ironic. If anyone else that's been through domestic abuse, they'd be like, 100% he's an abuser, you know. But my initial thing was, oh my gosh, I'm so scared. What if people believe, you know, oh, this is terrible. My whole life is going to, you know, be destroyed and TikTok's going to be over with. And so the only number I knew who to call was NCDV, you know, even though I'd been, because a lot of people look at me to gain the advice and it's like, but I need advice, I need support, I need help. So I called up NCDV. They told me, you know, non-molestation order. Within 3 weeks, I'd had what is called an emergency without notice non-molestation order. So you can have several different non-molestation orders, and NCDV help with all of that. They put you in the right direction for lawyers and people that will take on your case, because we get what's it called, what's the financial legal aid. So if you're a domestic abuse survivor, you are offered sometimes legal aid dependent on your salary, and they sort all of that out for you. So you just call them up and say, this is what's happening, and they can say, we can give it to them without notice, we can give it to them with notice, you won't be able to get it at all, whatever it is, but we will sort out all of the paperwork, which is just, so brilliant when you're dealing with police and social services and the doctors and the teachers, and so many people in our lives had to be informed. I didn't have the energy to fill in paperwork and, you know, all of that. So, and now he cannot contact me. My non-molestation order is... he can't contact me, he can't talk about me, he can't make fake accounts on TikTok about me, he can't make fake accounts on Instagram or on Facebook, because he did this across all social media. Any sort of aliases, so it's a very, very strict non-molestation order.
And very specific, which
very
I feel
specific.
Like maybe a lot of fear would come from people that want to speak out. It's just like, oh my God, is there one blanket situation they're going to put me in for protection? But I guess
the judge that I had was an honour judge, and they are renowned for being very strict with the rules. So within family courts, it's very different. Within a legal court, you don't need as much evidence to prove like the burden of proof, really. You do not have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt within a family court, which can make it messy. And it actually, I've definitely found in my experience that a lot of survivors have been re-abused through the family court
definitely.
because of the fact that you don't need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
On your TikTok, actually, which was one of the videos I saw, you made a really amazing point to stray away from the, overarching term of domestic violence, because that doesn't necessarily encapsulate all of the different types of abuse that comes underneath that. So would you be able to walk us through kind of what that looks like?
Yeah, so domestic abuse is an umbrella term, right? When you use the term DV or domestic violence, you are basically putting in a bracket to say it can only be physical violence in order for it to be recognized. Domestic abuse actually breaks down and has it so you recognize every single different type of abuse that's out there. So we obviously have domestic violence under domestic abuse. Now that is the physical violence, that is the sort of classical ABH, GBH. We now have non-fatal strangulation, which I think is a brilliant thing to be brought into law and legislation. So that's under the domestic violence header, so anything physical. You then obviously have sexual abuse. Now, sexual abuse is unwanted sexual contact, pretty much. So it doesn't have to be a penetrative rape. It can be, kissing, touching, oral. That it covers every single thing for sexual abuse. Sexual abuse as well, I might be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure sexual abuse also covers things like revenge porn. And it covers, so it doesn't even have to be physically being touched. It's actually things that may have happened previously that are now being used against you. So again, it's an umbrella term, and there's so many things within sexual abuse that causes problems for people. Pain, not problems. Then you have financial abuse. Financial abuse is just, as it says on the tin, really. Financial abuse is the power used by money. Now, it can be a number of different things. Financial abuse can be that I earn all the money as the victim and you are taking all of that money from me, and therefore I have no access to that money. It could be that you earn all of the money and you don't let me get a job, and you give me, a salary to live off, or like, an allowance, not a salary. So like for food shoppings and stuff. But it's in essence, they can take out debts in your name. They can do overdrafts in your name, etc., etc. And it's all about the power that financial abuse does towards somebody. And then the final one is emotional abuse, and emotional abuse covers things like coercion and control, which we were speaking about earlier, which has very recently been put into law, hasn't it?
2015.
Yeah. And that's sort of like, so people don't really know what coercive behaviour is either, do they? But it's in essence like persuasion. It's persuading somebody to do something against their will. That is what coercion is. Gaslighting.
Yeah.
Right.
Narcissistic abuse, the sort of buzzwords I hate, but they're the buzzwords with that fall under the emotional side of it. Degrading somebody, like not even necessarily gaslighting, just being vulgar, right? Constantly, as I spoke about my neighbour, constantly belittling her, constantly screaming, shouting at her. All of that is emotional abuse, telling you that you're not worthy, telling you that nobody's going to love you, telling you that, you're not going to achieve to be anybody, or you look too fat, or you look too thin, or your hair is too grey, or whatever it is. That is all emotional abuse.
And in any abusive relationship, there is always that.
Yeah.
If there isn't any of the other ones.
Yes.
There is always that.
Always. Yeah. That is, and that's why I think, for me personally, we should move away from domestic violence and say domestic abuse, because emotional abuse is the most common. And again, it is the deadly killer for victims, I think, because, nobody knows about it. You can't see that I've just been called a fat slag before I came here. I haven't, by the way.
Good.
But, you wouldn't be able to see that, because I could be bubbly and fine and maybe just pulling up my shirt a little bit and feeling a little bit uncomfortable. But that is emotional.
Some perpetrators will never use physical abuse, violence, because they don't need to, because they've got the level of control that they want and need
Through
from the
emotional.
coercive and the emotional control.
Yeah.
It's only when they start to feel like they're losing that control that they may resort to upping it to physical. So it's really, really important. And people don't, women and men, they don't realise that is, it's like Flo said earlier, well, I haven't been hit.
Yeah.
You know?
It's not to undermine the things that you have experienced, and I feel like that's so important, because when growing up, you have this idea of like domestic violence, and like you say, it's the aggression, it's the hitting, but I feel like nowadays we really do normalise that kind of degrading and talking down to people and gaslighting, and it's like we hear it on Love Island and we're like, oh, funny, someone's gaslighting someone. It's like, no, stop saying that's an acceptable way to
I find that on TikTok all the time. That's one of my biggest pet peeves, is the glorifying of like domestic abuse relationships, and they're like, haha, we're toxic. There was a thing called from non-molestation, so from restraining order to lovers. And in essence, it was a trend of people saying that they took out non-molestation orders on their partners and now they're lovers again. Now, we understand that they come back and they leave, and, it takes on average 7 times for a person to leave their perpetrator. I'm not shaming anybody, but I find that when you are glorifying that and when that becomes funny, that's an issue.
It's not a trend.
It's not a trend.
Yeah.
And it's not funny. And I actually think as well, and then I'll stop rambling, but when a victim dies via suicide because they are so degraded by emotional abuse, who is to blame? Is it the person that took the pills, or is it the perpetrator that belittled them for 20 years? I would say it was the latter, and that's why I call it the silent killer, because that will not be in the statistics. That will not be spoken about.
Yeah.
That will go down as suicide, and actually it was like murder by proxy. I don't even know if that's a real thing, but they, in my eyes, are to blame, because they have degraded somebody so much that they cannot see a way out. And that is why I think domestic abuse should be called domestic abuse.
One of the biggest things that I'm realising through watching your content is, in a lot of these situations, there's not much proof, and it is a lot about the retelling of your story and how believable that account is.
And how believable you are as a witness.
Yeah.
I think that's really sad.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have, the thing has always been, you shouldn't have to prove it. You shouldn't have to provide evidence. But, you do. In reality, you do, because otherwise you're not going to get the orders, you're not going to get the convictions or whatever it is. So, it is difficult, more so since coercive control has become, illegal.
Right.
Because, of course, there very rarely is any sort of physical evidence of that.
Yeah.
It's very good that we've got this system where it's innocent until proven guilty, right?
Yeah.
But all that does is make the victim guilty until proven innocent.
So those extra avenues of support like NCDV provides are so crucial to somebody going through something like that. Would you be able to give a bit of context to how you're into this line of work, Sharon?
How I got into this line of work?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's I'm a survivor of domestic abuse.
Yeah.
A long time ago, but listening to Flo strikes me, actually our stories are very, very similar, as of course many victims and survivor stories are very similar. So I have been working in the violence against women and girls sector for 27 years. Until I went to work at NCDV, that was all frontline. So I've worked in Refuge, I've worked in Westminster up here in London for 16 years, but mainly women, but I have worked with men as well. And then kind of went to NCDV about 3.5 years ago, and it felt, for me, it kind of felt like I'd gone full circle, because in order to get out of my abusive marriage, I got a non-molestation order.
Right.
So and that is what essentially helped me to leave the relationship, because he breached it many times and then went to prison. So that gave me that opportunity, you know. So it felt to me when I was kind of approached, really, because I wasn't looking for another job. I was approached by NCDV and asked if I wanted to go and work there. And I thought, this is like, yeah, this is meant to be, because I've gone full circle now. So yeah, so that's how I got into it. I didn't for like a long time, and like Flo, about 6 years afterwards, I had a breakdown.
Okay.
Which actually isn't commonly known, but it just Flo just talking about it. And like Flo, I thought, I'm all right, I'm okay, you know. I had a small child, and then when I had my second daughter, by a non-abusive man, it just blew up. My head just went, and I was seeing a community psychiatry nurse, and it was awful, and it wasn't until probably about 10 or 12 years, probably about 10 years afterwards, that I started to think, actually, I'd like to do something. I'd like to go into this and do it as a job, you know, and help people.
Yeah.
And kind of help people, you know, understand that there is kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, because you don't think there is when you're going through it. You just can't see it, you know.
100%. Yeah. Would you mind talking a bit about your experience in that time?
No, it's fine. So I met him in, we got married in 1984.
Okay.
And which is a long time ago. It's like 40 years ago. I'm old. I was very young then, actually. I was 18 when we got married.
Okay.
The abuse started probably, I mean, I remember him hitting me actually before we got married, but I didn't really think much of it at the time. And he said sorry and it's all right, you know. I think that the main it started mainly really when I got pregnant with our daughter, and escalated quite quickly afterwards. So I had sort of certain points in the relationship that I think of when I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
And I'd had our daughter by a cesarean. We were living at my parents' at the time, waiting to be rehoused by the council. And he went out to a party. I didn't want to go because my daughter had what I now know is like a heat rash. But, you know, she was my first child and I was young.
You panic all the time, don't you?
Yeah. So I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave her. So I stayed. And then, you know, it got really, really late. And I phoned the house. And there was no mobiles in that time. I phoned the house where he was. And they said he'd gone. I could hear him. Anyway, I thought, I'm just going to go to bed and I'm not going to make a fuss. And he came in and came upstairs and he had a can lager in his hand. And I was laying in bed and I thought, I'm not going to react. I'm just not going to react. And because I didn't react, he just poured this can of lager over my head. So I got up. I thought, I'm going to try and get to the bathroom. Bearing in mind, my parents were asleep in the bedroom next door. Right. And he wouldn't let me pass. And he punched me in the stomach. I'd had a cesarean section.
Oh, my God.
And that, I think, was my biggest mistake because I let him get away with that. You know, I believed him when he said he was sorry and everything.
Can I just say, because I noticed language just as a teacher, and
I was going to say the mistake.
It's not. You just said that was my biggest mistake. I don't.
Oh yeah,
it's not yours.
Don't
punish yourself.
But you see, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's interesting because I still do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like all these years later, like my daughter's 39 in August. So like 39 years later, I'm working in it for 27 years and I still say that.
Yeah.
And it's I think I do as well. Like I definitely blame myself. I went through a theory once where it was like, when does the victim turn to be the perpetrator of their own abuse?
Yeah.
And this isn't, I don't actually believe it, but internally, if somebody said, oh, I am to blame because my boyfriend hit me, I'd be like, oh my gosh. But just like you, I think, well, I stayed. you know, is it my fault? And I think that also is powerful to talk about, so that other people realize that they're not alone in those thoughts. And actually we could be the best girlfriend in the world and still probably have those thoughts.
But, you know, women say, I've had a lot of women say to me that I've worked with, but you don't look like a battered woman. And I always say, what does a battered woman look like? You know, I mean, like, what do you think? What is that perception? You know,
that's really interesting. I've spoken to a lot of doctors, nurses, NHS workers, so cover all of that, firefighters, police officers. I speak to a lot of those that are trained to spot the signs in somebody else and think that domestic abuse is, I guess, a class issue, maybe, you know, that it only ever happens to lower class these types of people. And actually they're in a domestic abuse relationship and they had no idea. And they are trained to spot those signs, and yet they had no idea until somebody or one of their friends said, you're being abused. And then it starts clocking in like, oh yeah, you know, and that shook their world because they were thinking, well, how can I be trained to spot all of these signs? And, you know, especially if you have, like you say, that perception of what a battered girlfriend is, you know, and actually it is, all classes are affected by it. All different people are affected by it. All genders are affected by it.
And actually, in my experience working in it, it's the women, should we say, that middle class women, that they are, perhaps they have more boundaries, more barriers, to leaving than your typical stereotype, as I was seen, I suppose, you know, council house, born and bred type of, on benefits, you know, single parent. Right. Because I could go into a refuge because I would get housing benefit. Women that have got property in their names, you know, it's a misconception that refuges are free. They're not. No. In London, they're upwards of £500 a week. To live in.
That's not a permanent fixture, is it?
If you've got property, you can't get, if you can't get housing benefit, you can't go into a refuge. So where do you go? You know? So for those women, it's more difficult, actually.
Yeah.
100%. And even those with like the financial abuse, that like the financial abuse is worse, I think, the higher the salary, right? Because you're going to be controlled more and more and more. And I do think that as well. I know somebody that actually... So this is a little top tip. If anyone that is watching that is in a financial abusive relationship and would struggle with the money, her husband would give her weekly shopping allowance. She used the cost of living crisis as an excuse.
Right.
And the shopping went up by £50 a week. Yeah, £50 a week she pocketed.
Oh, okay.
And she had to plan meticulously so she knew she was leaving a year before she could leave. So she took £50 a week for a year so that she had enough money to survive for her and her children when she decided it was time to flee, because he was so strict with the financial abuse and so overpowering with the financial abuse that, you know, she wouldn't have been. And the thing is, what he did as well is he put all of the bills in her name. So he would transfer a lot of the money over into her name. So it looked like she had a lot of money. And actually she was given an allowance to basically go and feed the kids a week. So yeah, I thought that was inspiring that she told me that. Very, very brave and very, very clever. So
clever. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to think that many steps ahead, I feel like in that situation you're in is not easy.
Yeah, I mean, I thought steps ahead as well. The first time that he hurt me, I didn't record it. And then after that point on, I made a fake email address. So it was just a random email address. And what I would do is, after an incident, he basically would usher me off into the bathroom to go and clean myself up. With any of the incidences, whether it was sexual or physical, I'd have to be put into the bathroom, like, I guess, like an animal. But in that in-between time, I was able to take pictures of the said incident, and then I'd send myself it. So I'd send a picture with a little blurb where it was like, X did this time because a fork wasn't clean. And I sent that. So not only did it have a date and a timestamp, it had a very short summary of what happened so that I might be able to remember, oh yeah, that I remember that. And then a picture to link up to what I went through. And then I deleted the picture, deleted the email from my sent items. He had no idea. And when I fled, I had this whole email address.
Wow.
Full.
So I wonder if it would have been, I mean, because I didn't have that option. There were
No.
emails.
Yeah.
No phones,
smartphones,
couldn't take pictures. So, there was literally no evidence.
Yeah.
When I left.
Yeah.
Apart from the fact that I had the non-molestation order, of course.
Yeah. I guess, back in the 80s, you couldn't document it.
Not really.
After that first instance, what happened? Did you tell someone about it? What was the next?
I told friends, they knew. I remember him we were at a flat party in the block of flats where we lived. I remember him trying to throw me off. I don't know why I'm laughing. Trying to throw me off of the balcony, and my friends stopping him, basically pulling me back. But nobody really knew. Nobody really knew what to say. He was like the life and soul of the party, do anything for anyone, nobody really said anything, did anything to help me. I didn't know anywhere that could help me. I didn't even know there were refuges at that point,
Right.
So it just kind of carried on, and then got worse and worse. And then my next door neighbour, she was having problems with her husband as well, and she said, you should go to this solicitor and speak to her. So I did, and she said to me, we can get a non-molestation injunction, and are you ready to leave? And I wasn't ready to leave. I don't know why. Don't know why now, but I wasn't ready to leave. And I said, no, this might stop him, this might stop him from doing it. So went to court, got the without notice non-molestation order, which meant that he didn't know I was going to court to get it.
Right.
But it had to be served on him, and I was still living with him. So the process server came, and that was a hairy,
Gosh, that
was
was
a scary evening. I know. I can remember it now. I was sitting there waiting for the door to knock, and the process server, who is basically somebody that comes to the door and gives them, because until those papers have been given to that person, they're not in effect.
Right.
Okay.
That was what happened with me very recently. So NCDV helped me. By December, I was in court getting a without notice non-molestation order. He didn't get it served to him until February because he kept evading service. And so
so that's what someone can do.
They can do that.
Be
Very
approached.
easily,
Yeah. They can just evade service.
So it's easier sometimes if they don't know that it's coming.
Right.
Like my then husband, but he opened the door, took the papers, came into the living room, read them, and just looked at me and just tore them up.
Would you be able to also just explain to our listeners what actually is a non-molestation order?
Yeah, so a non-molestation order is it's a civil order. It doesn't involve the police. So in my personal experience, and I'm working with probably hundreds of women. A lot of women don't want to get the police involved.
Yeah.
They don't want to do it. And in kind of the last few years, that's been more so, I think, because there hasn't been an awful lot of trust in police since the murder of Sarah Everard.
Yeah.
So this way, they don't have to involve the police. The police only get involved if that order is breached. So it's a civil order, as Flo was saying, and it can contain various different clauses that are kind of tailored, if you like, to that situation, to that person. So it can be like not contacting on social media, no phone calls, no texts, not to go within 50 yards of the person or the person's house. It's kind of tailored really to that person. And if after the judge has given that order, if the perpetrator then breaches that order in any way, then they can be basically they can be sent to prison for up to 5 years. Generally they're not. It depends. It's kind of on a sliding scale, really. If I mean, in reality, the police have got a positive arrest policy, and they should arrest whatever the breach is. In reality, they don't, but they should do. Okay. So if it's like a text message, they probably wouldn't go out and arrest the person. Right. But if they'd gone round, as my ex-husband did, and stabbed you, then obviously the police are going to go and arrest. So it's
your abuser stabbed you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, what?
Yeah, and that was after I'd left, actually. So the statistic that you're more in danger once you've actually left is I can attest to that. So
I can't even imagine. So he's been served the order.
Yeah. And
then I guess it only gets
worse. So he
worse.
was served the order, and then after that, he was just breaching it all the time. He broke my nose, and I went to I actually left him on January the 4th, 1988, and I just fled. It was I got up one morning and thought, that's it, I can't do it anymore. Took my daughter, actually packed in front of him. He didn't think I would go. He went back to sleep. And I left, and I called my solicitor, and I had about 2 weeks left to run on this order. I'd got it in the October. It was for 3 months, and I had about 2 weeks left. And I said to her, he's broke my nose, he's done this, he's done that. And it was an awful Christmas as well. And she called the police, and the police went and arrested him, and we were in court the next day, and he was sentenced to 2 months in prison for breaching the order, which was very unusual back then. Okay. Really unusual. Everyone was really shocked. I was terrified. I thought, oh, that's it. That is it. It's going to kill me. The police were excellent, actually, all the way through, and they were like, no, we'll protect you, and all the rest of it. So he actually did a month, because you do like half, and he came out, and he was only out for about a week, and he was just coming round, kicking the door in, just like listening to the letterbox if I was on the phone, and then he'd kick the door in and take the phone off me and bash it over me. I don't know, I was just like, ugh. And then my friend said to me, come out with me to the local nightclub. So my mum had my little girl, went to the nightclub. It wasn't late, coming home about 11:30. She came in with me, and as soon as I opened the front door, I picked my little girl up from my parents and came home. As soon as I opened the front door, I knew he was in there. I knew he was in the flat. I could see his chair. What was his chair? It was kind of moved slightly. And I said to her, just go in and turn all the lights. When you see these horror films and nobody turns on the lights. And I was like, just go and turn on all the lights. And she was laughing. She was like, oh, you're paranoid. I put my little girl to bed, in her bed, and went into like what was our bedroom. And I had one of these, probably too young to remember MFI, furniture store. But it was like double wardrobe with a bit over the top. And I said to her, open my side. And she did, and she was laughing. And I said, open his side. And she opened it, and he jumped out with a carving knife in his hand. And I was sort of like up against the bed, and he came up with the knife, and it went through my hand there. He brought it down, so I put my hand up, and he put the knife down. It went through my hand, and then as he brought the knife up again, she was behind him, and she took the knife out of his hand. Yeah, otherwise I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
I'd be here to tell the tale. And as she went into the other room and called the police, and he was kind of, I just remember going like this, and I don't know, it was the adrenaline. It wasn't bleeding at the time, but I remember just going like this, and then it was like pump. And I said to him, "You've stabbed me," and I can remember him saying, "Oh, it's just a scratch." No, it's not a scratch. It's gaping, you know. And it was kind of like he thought, "Oh, I don't know what you thought." Anyway, he ran out the flat.
Yeah.
But even when the police turned up, I had a tea towel around my hand, and I put my hand behind my back, and didn't tell them that he'd stabbed me, and just said that he was there and he shouldn't have been there.
Why?
His dad had died in between him coming out of prison and him stabbing me. His dad had died.
Yeah.
And it was the funeral the next day.
Yeah.
And I just, in my head, I was just thinking, if he doesn't go to his dad's funeral, his whole family are going to hate me. Don't know why it bothered me so much, you know.
Yeah.
He did go in handcuffs. Escorted by the police, so his family still hated me.
Right.
You know, couldn't do any right anyway. But
I think trauma bonds are a real thing that you wouldn't have known about in the 1980s. You know, like
Stockholm syndrome and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Why? Well, because she had a trauma bond.
Yeah.
You know, that's really the reason, regardless whether people from the outside can understand that or not. The reason why is because you were bonded to this man.
I didn't want him to get into trouble.
Yeah.
I wanted him to stop hitting me.
Yeah.
I didn't want him to go to prison. I didn't want any of that to happen.
And it's so much more complex because that's the dad of your child, right?
Yeah.
And you're worried about all those other relationships of what your friends will think. And I don't say why as in like a accusatory, like why.
No. I
did you
know.
say it like
No.
that? But I think like, yeah, what's so important, and even I've witnessed in my life, is that people are so deep in their situations that it's not just as simple as like,
it's really not.
Even when there's just like, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah.
Even when there's like a dickhead boyfriend, like he's not an abuser, but he's just a bit of a dickhead.
Yeah.
He's lazy, he's a slob or whatever. And you say to your friend, like, you can do better than that. She's not leaving until she's had enough.
Yeah.
It's the exact same times 1,000 when you're in a domestic abuse relationship.
100%.
Nobody is going to be able to leave until they are ready.
No.
Simple.
Yeah.
You can keep telling them, you can guide them, you can hold their hand, you can, remind them of all the services, but nobody will go until their breaking point is their breaking point.
And I always say to women, don't go until you're ready, because they'll go back.
Then you go back. Yeah.
And then it's 10 times worse.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, I always knew. I knew when I didn't kind of. I mean, I know that a lot of women leave, go back. I wasn't one of those women. I always knew that when I went, that would be it.
That's
I wouldn't
the same
go back.
with me.
So it had to be at the right time, you know.
Yeah.
And it was, but that doesn't mean it's over. That doesn't mean that the abuse is over. It's not. It's more dangerous after that, you know.
I was fortunate enough to have hundreds of miles in between me and my abuser, but very similar. I didn't keep going and coming. And in a way, like I start self-analysing, and I think maybe I did leave because there would be times where I'd mentally check out and be like, I'm done.
Yeah.
And then the next day I'd be like chilling with him again. So, even though I'd physically not left, I feel like I'd mentally left quite a few times before I actually did.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was the same. Mine was, the thing is I knew what was happening was wrong.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, I knew what was happening, what was wrong, which is why I sent the videos and the pictures and everything to that email address.
Yeah.
It was then just about what was my level. My level was social services.
Yeah.
That was my level. Got social services were involved, and they said to me, you could be the best mum in the world, but if you stay with this man, you are putting your child at risk, and therefore your child is now on the child in need plan. So I had a 4-week-old baby in a child in need plan, had the very real possibility of him being removed from my care.
Yeah.
And that was enough.
Yeah.
That was enough for me to say, I love my son more than I want this man to be okay.
Yeah.
And that's why I fled.
Definitely. I think it's actually really interesting that you bring up about the characteristics of an abuser, because you were saying like he was viewed as the life of the party, he was a big drinker, he's fun to be around. And I think particularly in this campaign, it's a time of like big major football tournaments, people are drinking more, they're being more social. It's a little bit more, I don't want to say accepted, but normalised to have that aggressive behaviour, that like alpha energy about these things. So do you think there's a link there between, you know, it happening around these kind of big matches?
For me, definitely.
Yeah.
It was, I hate football, absolutely detest it. And the reason why is because it was every time, you know, there was a big tournament, I would get beaten up, regardless, but probably worse if England lost. And I lost count of how many remote controls went through television screens, and I just used to be absolutely terrified of a big tournament coming up, because that would always happen.
I'm very curious, just curiosity killed the cat, I guess. Was he a fan of another football team? Was he like that with the other football team as well? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I've always like wondered with the link of England, is it because, let's say, I don't think I can even say other football teams, can I? Can I?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say like Leeds and Arsenal, they are not going to be possibly playing on the same day. One will play on Saturday, one will play on Sunday. Let's say a man who supports Leeds and a man who supports Arsenal are both abusive. It means that they're going to be abusive on separate days. Whereas when it is England,
Right.
they are abusive on the same day across the country. That is where I'm seeing it. I think that there is a pattern. My abuser wasn't abusive with football. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
I absolutely love football. So, you know, it's a stark sort of contrast, really. But that's why I wonder whether it increases. I also think as well, when do England play? England play in the summer. Everybody is so excited about football is coming home. We're going to go to beer gardens. We're going to go to, you know, pubs with our friends. We're going to go round our families' houses. We're going to have the windows open because it is hot. I think, you know, if I went round yours and you knew that there was a victim upstairs, but you never called the police before.
Yeah.
I'm a survivor. I'm coming around to watch football with you because I like football and so do you. But I'm going to call the police because I can hear it.
Yeah.
And that's just who I am. You know, there's a lot of like neighbours who kind of ignore that behaviour. But then when football is on, it congregates people together.
Yeah.
And it makes it so other people are alert to it and that they've been exposed to it.
But we never went out. I mean, I was never with him. I never watched those matches. I mean, you know, if he watched a match at home, there would very rarely be, sometimes he would invite his mates round, not often. There wasn't necessarily drink involved either.
Oh, okay.
He was a football hooligan anyway, so you know, a lot of the times he used to go up to the big games of his team as well, and he'd get arrested, you know. The police would call me and say, will you come and get him? And I used to say no. Towards the later part, I would say no. Keep him.
Fair enough, yeah.
And then the next day he would come in, but like having spent the night in the cells, and say, didn't they phone you? And I'd go, no.
What was that?
You know, but I had like a bit of a reprieve. So there wasn't always alcohol involved with mine.
No, I don't.
But it was... I clearly remember the feeling of just absolute terror waiting for him to come back, you know, from a football match, especially an England one.
Yeah, I think make a really good point there about it's not always drinking and the abuse is there 24/7. It's obviously exasperated by these games, but like, I guess, okay, so you as a survivor would know the signs to look out for. What are the kind of signs that we should be spotting?
I think that just constant belittling of somebody is definitely a sign. If you are a neighbour, one of the things as well, this is up for debate, and people have their own different opinions on it, and I guess that's what makes domestic abuse complicated, right? Because it's not a one size fits all and everybody has their own opinion on it. Me and you as survivors both have a voice. We're both entitled to have our voice spoken, and yet we might think differently. And I think a lot of people wonder whether calling the police is the best thing. If you are a neighbour and you are overhearing it, is calling the police the most sensible? Because the police don't really, unless they're going in and they're walking in and seeing something horrific, they're just going to, I mean, with my experience with the police, it was a knock on the door. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Okay, toodle pips. So,
and you're just left with it.
And then you're just left with it. And then you're also left with the, can't believe you fucking called the police on me. Like, how dare you? Like, oh my God, like you're mugging me off in front of everybody. And now it's doubly bad, because now it's like, I didn't call the police. Somebody's obviously heard that. So, but I would always say it's dependent on the situation. If you see something in the street, please help them. One of the things that my abuser always used to do is he used to attack me in the street. I'm 5'1.5". That half is very important, guys. And I was very, very skinny. I was anorexic at the time that I met my abuser. So I was 6 stone with this belly. Like, it looked like it was a plastic belly because it was like stuck on, and I was diddy. And he was over 6 foot, beating me up in the street. And nobody did a thing. Yeah. So I would beg people as they were walking past. I was like, please help, please call the police. And they would walk past and ignore me. And so, that's
the thing, isn't it? It's so taboo.
Yeah.
And it still is.
Yeah.
So taboo.
Yeah.
Everybody knows somebody. Everybody knows somebody that's going through it. But very rarely will they ever admit it. Why?
Because there's shame. And that's what I do with my TikTok. Like, I always say this phrase: I will not hold shame for somebody else's actions. I am done feeling shame for somebody else's actions. I get trolled all the time. I get called horrific things. I get called that, and it's not for the faint-hearted. I'm just very lucky. The support system that I've got around me just know who I am as a human, so that helps me bounce back. But they're trying to shame me for somebody else's actions. I cannot shower because of his choices, not because of mine. And therefore, okay, say that I stink. You're not sat next to me. You have no idea if I stink or if I don't. So the opinion is irrelevant. But leading back on to what to do, what's the signs? If it is in the street, I personally think it is a safety protocol to call 999 to get involved. Not, you have to also assess it yourself. Don't put yourself in a dangerous situation, but bare minimum is to call 999 and to get support for that person. And then, if it's the neighbours, I mean, I've very recently had a neighbour who was going through domestic abuse. It wasn't physical, but it was emotional, and it was horrific to listen to. It was all day, every day. I was having to listen to her being called some of the most degrading things. And I pulled her aside and I said, what you were going through is domestic abuse. And she said, oh, but I'm not being hit. And I said, I can hear it. It doesn't need to be physical. If this continues, well, I didn't even say if this continues, but I basically said, would you like me to call the police? She said no. I said, you've got a safe space in my house. Please run to my house if you're needed. So me and her put in essence a safety protocol because she wasn't ready at that time to call the police, and I didn't want to make it worse. So we literally had like a step-by-step, this is what's going to happen. This is the exit of your house that you're going to take and how you're going to get into my house. And then we will do that. When she was ready to flee him, she was in my house till 3 o'clock in the morning. So we had that put in place.
Absolutely essential, I agree. Safety plan
if you have a neighbour, and it doesn't have to be like knocking on the door like, I know you're being abused, guys. It's just like general conversation. I used to start dripping in like, oh yeah, I'm a survivor of domestic abuse, and oh yeah, like I do TikTok. I started drip feeding that in, and like when I was getting the bins, I was like, hi, you okay?
Once you say that you are, I mean, that just opens, that's really how I approach it, to be honest. Once you say, oh, actually, I'm a survivor of domestic abuse, that's it. And even if they don't say something at the time, you often find they'll come back.
Definitely.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So that's an easy way of getting in there, really, and starting the conversation.
And I guess for the people that aren't domestic abuse victims that are listening, that do want to help their neighbours, it's not about shaming them, because a lot of us feel shame. A lot of us think, I'll leave him, don't worry about it. Then you can't even look at your neighbour in the face because they know that you've stayed with them. So it's about creating that safe space. I said to this particular lady, this is a judgment-free zone. I do not care if you go back 12 times. I just want you to know that final time, I'm still there. And a lot of people do not offer that to survivors. You see comments all the time of like, oh yeah, I had to drop out my friend because she chose her boyfriend over me. And it's like, did she choose, or was she forced? And if she was forced, how do you know that she's got a safe space to go to when she really needs it the most?
I think that's one of the reasons that, I kind of believe in NCDV so much, because we don't force people to, if they're referred by the police, and then by the time we contact them the next day, they, usually have changed their minds, we don't put any pressure on them. We say, okay, that's fine. Do you want any help from anywhere else? Can we put you in touch with anyone else? 9 times out of 10, the person say no, but they know that it's a judge-free.
Yeah,
they know when
place.
It's that final chance,
definitely.
who to call,
and
that's why I called it
they come
NCDV.
back when they're ready. And that's really important. It's really important because they are living their life with somebody controlling them. The last thing they want is anybody else doing it.
100%. Yeah, and you make such a good point that a survivor is not always someone that's got a battered face or like, it's very physically obvious. So I guess as people that aren't being abused, if we can take that little extra time to read between the lines, stuff like when a football loses a game, if someone's throwing a remote through a TV, it's not normal.
Not normal.
And that's not okay.
I am a massive Leeds United fan. Like, I will talk you till you're blue in the face about Leeds United.
Right.
I have mental health issues, which is another thing that abusers use as an excuse. Like, there's a lot of things that alcohol or drugs or whatever it is. If I drink a glass of wine, I don't think to throw my remote through the TV when Leeds lose.
And it's like, because there's a lot of drink involved. Well, there might be, or there might not be. It's not about that.
It's not.
Domestic abuse is only about control and power. And some people kind of like real sort of football fans, some football fans, take my ex-husband for example, he that was his whole identity. So if they lost, he saw that as some sort of weakness.
I also think as well, they see it as an excuse. You see someone that's like got alcohol dependency, they'll say, oh, I had a glass of wine at lunchtime because my tire popped, or so there'd be a reason, right? My hair didn't go the right way, so I'm stressed, so I'm going to have a glass of drink. It's the same with domestic abusers. That actually, that's a perfect reason to hit or hurt somebody. I did that because England lost. It's a perfect excuse, and actually it might not even be anything other than the fact that they're a domestic abuser.
Weakness. It's their, which you can't see if you're on the receiving end of it, because you feel like the weak one. But it's their weakness and their way of getting back that control that they have to have. Don't ask me why. If I knew the answer, I wouldn't still be doing the job, But it's their identity. They're so wrapped up in that game, in that sport, that it's somehow, when they lose, when England lose, it's somehow a reflection on them and their control. I don't know, it doesn't make sense, does it? But do you know what I mean? I think that is one of the reasons why it's not about drink.
No.
It's not about drink. Yeah, some people do, and the level of that incident, that single incident, might be worse than it had been if that person hadn't been drinking. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But it's not the reason.
100%.
It's not the reason.
And is there an assumption in terms of, seeking help and getting out of that environment? Does it have to be the worst violence, or can it be like what encapsulates that other level of abuse?
I've worked with, I don't know, probably 1,000 women, and I can probably count on two hands how many I've actually seen with black eyes and bruising. It just doesn't happen. Refuges are not full of women with beaten up faces. They're not. They don't leave when that happens. They're more clever than that.
I think I think it's really important as well to kind of reiterate that and the intensity of emotional abuse, because that is the unseen killer in domestic abuse.
Yeah, it's the worst. That still affects me now. 40 years later. I've got a bit of OCD about sort of cleaning. That comes from him. Because if I hadn't have bleached down the kind of alcatraves on the doors every day, he would hit me. So 40 years later, I'm not quite as bad as that. I don't bleach them down, but I'm still quite OCD. And I recognise now that's because of that.
Yeah, I'm the exact same. There's certain things like, oh, my poor partner, like when there's like a bit of coffee granules on the side, it triggers me because it reminds me of incidences that I got, because all me and my partner, my abuser used to argue about was washing up. That was the main thing. So when me and my partner are now like looking at like washing the pots, it gets, and he'll be like, oh, I'll do it. It internally, like there's some sort of internal trigger that I really struggle with. So I that's why I smiled when you said it, but I thought, God, if they show my face, I'm not smiling at the horrific story. I'm just smiling that I get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the stuff, and so many women will agree with this, and I know Flo will. It's the stuff that goes in that's said to you over the time that you're in that relationship. It's the stuff that goes in here that does the damage. Not the black eyes, not the broken noses. They hurt, but they heal. But the stuff that goes in here never goes away, ever.
100%. So say if you're in a situation like this and then you're getting help from like NCDV, what does life after that look like for both of you on a personal account as well?
On a personal level, it has been a bumpy ride, like I've said. But I mean, look, I'm here. I'm wearing this shirt. Like, it is amazing. I'm representing NCDV. I'm representing Solace. I'm representing domestic abuse. I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't have been free. Yes, it's a bit weird how I am here, because I do struggle with the physical side. I think, obviously you were talking about people not having, I know you wasn't saying that they don't have lasting impacts. You're saying that the broken noses and stuff heal. My physical waterboarding is something that emotionally is still affecting me to this day. So, that was a decade ago, and I am still struggling with those aspects. But I have an amazing 10-year-old son. He is literally so lovely. Like, he's so kind. He does these little like secret goodie bags around his his area, because he just wants to make people smile.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, he's honestly, he's so amazing. I have a fantastic partner who has helped me throughout the last 4 years with my mental breakdown. I have an amazing stepdaughter who I wouldn't have had without my partner. My dad is fantastic. Like, there's so many people that I could reel off that are just such an amazing support around me that I wouldn't have if I hadn't have left. And so that's what I want to normalize. I want to normalize that it is hard and it is a lot of work, but that hardness is only a fraction of how I felt when I was actually in the relationship. you know, like, yes, it's not all sunshines and roses, and there are struggles and uphill challenges, but I would much prefer that with love around me than to do that with hate around me, because life is a struggle, right?
Yeah.
It's an uphill battle, whether you're in a domestic abuse relationship or you're not. But what do you want? Do you want someone belittling you, who's swearing at the TV and like is frustrated that England's lost, or do you want somebody who parted your hair for a podcast?
Oh, that's gorgeous. Yeah, that's
you know,
amazing.
that's the difference.
Yeah,
I think everyone would choose the latter.
100%. Love that. Thanks, Flo. What about you, Sharon?
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it is hard, and mine's even longer ago. It's like I would have been married to him 40 years this year, and that's a long time. You know, still have struggles with my eldest daughter, because unfortunately her mental health has really been impacted by her father, who she doesn't see anymore, obviously, but you know, I'm kind of always reminded, really, that's come from that.
Yeah.
But you know, she does well. I've got 2 beautiful grandchildren from her, and I've had another daughter, and she's 33. She's just had a little baby girl.
Nice.
So yeah, it's good. But I guess it sounds really cheesy, but my work is my life.
Mm-hmm.
It is, sometimes to my detriment. And without that, I mean, I just think there must be a reason that I went through all that.
Yeah.
And I've always said, as a cliche, I've always said, you know, I just want to be the person that I wish I'd have had when I went through it, because I didn't have anyone, and I didn't know anyone, you know. Yeah. And that has its bonuses as well as its drawbacks, because I do find it hard to say no to anyone that needs help. But yeah, my work is my life, and I love it, and I love what I do, and I feel proud of myself. I feel like I've really, you know, I could have gone one way, but I've gone the other, and I've really, for me, I've helped a lot of women.
Yeah.
I know I have. And I'm grateful, you know. So if that's the reason that I went through it, fine.
So what was it that made you want to get involved in this No More Injury Time campaign?
For us, for NCDV, we've done campaigns before around the major football tournaments, and so when we were approached by yourselves, we were, absolutely, we wanted to do the collaboration and get involved, because we've always felt it's an important issue to raise and raise awareness from it.
This campaign means so much to me, honestly. It's such a privilege to be a part of this and to be surrounded by so many amazing women. Like, you know, last week when we went to the Brentford football stadium just to see and hear people's stories, it's an honour to share this podcast with you. And yeah, it's been really inspirational to listen to your story, and I really recognise a lot of myself in you, and so it's it's really interesting to be able to say, like, if I keep going, that this is my journey. So, you know, I have a very special place in my heart for domestic abuse survivors, and I also have a very special place in my heart for football. So to be able to combine that to make it better for the next generation is, I mean, this is going to go down as my top number one thing I've done. So that's
an amazing answer. I love that. Would you just be able to summarise what services NCDV offers?
Yeah, so NCDV, we offer a free service to victims and survivors of domestic abuse, male and female, to help them get non-molestation orders, predominantly non-molestation orders. We also help them get occupation orders and prohibited steps orders. Last year we had 100,380 referrals. Wow. And we helped nearly 6,000 people who weren't entitled to legal aid, which is the main reason NCDV was founded, to help people that weren't entitled to legal aid. We also signpost them and refer them to other organisations that they may need help and assistance from.
Amazing. Cool.
Yeah, I forgot I got my PSO from NCDV, and I was also signposted to CARA, which I then got my counselling. My son got his counselling through. So amazing.
Cool. In terminology, and especially in addressing you guys, you prefer to use the term survivor over victim. Would you be able to give some context in why that's so important?
A lot of people that have been through domestic abuse don't see themselves as victims. Mm-hmm. I have never seen myself as a victim. I have survived it. I'm still here. Yeah. It was difficult. I nearly didn't survive it. So I prefer the term survivor.
Whereas I don't think I'm a survivor.
Yeah, so it's a very personal thing. In terms of my work, when I'm speaking, I'm very aware that it's a very personal thing. So when I speak, I tend to say victim survivor if I can. If I'm doing something in writing, I don't know, a presentation or something, I will always use the term victim survivor, because I think it is a very, very personal thing. I don't see myself as a victim. I see myself as a survivor. Flo doesn't. It's very,
I don't
very
see
personal.
myself as either, though. So I'm a little bit pernickety, but I blame my mum for the English language.
Right.
I am not a victim because I have not died, and I am free.
Yeah.
But I'm not a survivor, because by being a survivor means I've gone through it, and that invalidates my experiences right now. The shower that I cannot take, the medicine that I am taking, the counselling that I am doing. I'm surviving. I haven't survived. Yeah. That's
and I get
for
that
me.
too. Yeah, I get that too. And that's what I mean. It's a very personal thing, really.
Yeah. Definitely.
So when I heard that question, I was like, oh.
Sorry.
Oh, no.
No, I think that's great.
But I think you're right. Like, it's very personal. Some people see themselves as victims. Some people see themselves as survivors.
Yeah.
Some people don't even want to be attached to it.
No.
Some people want to pretend it didn't even exist.
Yeah.
They don't want to be called domestic abuse anything.
Yeah.
They just want to exist. So, yeah. You'll never be able to please everybody, but... the world is made up of so many different people, right? That you're never, in whatever you do, are going to be able to fit it for every single person.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants something different.
And it does demand that different sense of sensitivity depending on how someone
And I just think it's like a respect thing, right?
100%.
Like if you say oh, what do you want me to refer you? And I'm like, oh, domestic abuse survivor, and you keep calling me a domestic abuse victim, then I can be frustrated with that, right? But if you're doing it as a generalised, I think people need to...
As a generalised thing, the easiest way to say is that somebody that has experienced domestic abuse.
100%.
Yes. Yeah. And try and kind of steer away from the labelling, really.
Yeah.
Because, some people don't even recognise that they are experiencing domestic abuse, so they're certainly not going to recognise or identify as a victim or a survivor.
100%.
Well, thank you so much for coming on teaatfour today. I have loved this episode, and if people want to find out a bit more about you and your journey, Flo, where would they find that?
So TikTok, so it's Flora's Recovery with just 2 Y's at the end. That's where you'll find me most of the time.
Perfect. And what about you, Sharon?
If anyone wants to know anything about NCDV, they can go onto our website, which is www.ncdv.org.uk.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will see you next week. Thank you for listening. If you or someone you know has been experiencing domestic abuse, then please head to the links in our bio for more information on our violence against women and girls partners.